This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, Stephen Cole, is an award-winning musical theater writer whose shows have been recorded, published, and produced on stages around the world. Stephen's off-Broadway musical, After the Affair, with music by Matthew Ward, was the winner of 5 Dallas Theater Awards, including Best New Play or Musical. It was nominated for the Outer Critics Circle Award for Best Musical and was subsequently produced in London. The Night of the Hunter, with music by Clabe Richardson, won the prestigious Edward Kleban Award and was produced as part of the New York Musical Theater Festival in 2006, where Stephen won a Best Lyricist nod. Other well-known Stephen Cole musicals include Saturday Night at Grossinger's, with music by Clabe Richardson, The Tour of Casper, with music by Matthew Ward, featuring the legendary Chita Rivera, Dodsworth, with music by Jeffrey Saver that featured Hal Linden and Dee Hoty, Aspire, with composer David Crane, in which they were commissioned to write the first American musical to premiere in the Middle East. Their experiences resulted in another musical about the creation of that show entitled The Road to Qatar. Most recently, Stephen conceived, wrote, and directed Lynn Halliday in My Heart Belongs to Mary, a celebration of the great Mary Martin. Stephen has written continuity, narration, and special material for 20 different Drama League shows, including all-star tributes to Kander and Ebb, Liza Minnelli, Chita Rivera, Terrence McNally, Liz Smith, Peter Stone, Angela Lansbury, Patti LuPone, Kristin Chenoweth, and Audra McDonald. Upcoming in September, a production of Merman's Apprentice will be staged in Sonoma, California, and an October production of Casper will be performed in Cincinnati. And 3 other musicals are on deck: Black and White Ball, Goin Hollywood, and Ain't It the Truth. Stephen is also a published author with 4 books to his credit, including That Book About That Girl, I Could Have Sung All Night, the Marni Nixon story, Noel Coward, a Bio-Bibliography, and Charles Strous's memoir, Put on a Happy Face. Stephen is also working on a new novel and other short stories. For more information, please check out stephencolewriter.org. And so for all of those reasons and many more, it is my great honor and privilege to have the hard-working writer of musicals and other things, Stephen Cole, on StoryBeat today. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Gosh, listening to that was, wow, a lot of stuff.
Makes you feel like maybe you've done something.
One slight correction. It's After the Fair.
After the Fair.
As opposed to the Affair, even though one of the New York critics said this should be called After the Affair, but it's not.
Okay, well, I stand corrected, and thank you for saying so.
You.
So where did all this begin? Why musicals? How did you get into this? Where does it start from?
Oh, gosh, it all started with my mother. Where does anything start? She took me to see my first musical, and it was Hello, Dolly, starring Betty Grable.
Oh,
and I had no idea what a live show was. I was about 9, and I knew movies. And suddenly I saw live people on a stage way down from the top of the balcony, and it just changed my life, musical numbers and the excitement of it. And I just wanted to see more and more. And then I started fantasizing about writing my own, being in my own. And I was a performer at an early age, at 14. So at 15, I took out a typewriter. Remember those?
I do.
And I just sat down and wrote my first musical.
Wow!
Because I thought it would be fun, and it was.
You wrote it from scratch, with not based on anything?
It was an original 1930s musical that I can tell you this: if you ever saw Anything Goes, then you saw my show Everything's Fine. It was a very derivative, but it was an incredibly great learning experience to do a musical that was like a Cole Porter show.
Well, sure.
And I got it produced when I was 16 at Brooklyn College.
Is that right? So
amazing.
At 16, you were already had a musical produced.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty amazing. How did you convince them to do that?
Excuse me?
How did you convince them to do that?
Well, the composer, I never write music. I always write book and lyrics. And I found this composer when I was in high school. He was ahead of me. He went on to Brooklyn College, and he told me that there was this opportunity because he was in college and I was still in high school. And we grabbed the opportunity, and we did everything ourselves. I directed it. I staged it. I was in it. He played the piano. But we were given the space and the time and a little bit of money, and we did it.
And did you know once you had done that? Clearly, it got into your blood, and it's been there ever since. But did you know at that time that you had talent for it? Did you feel that?
Yes, I did. And I think I knew that I could put words to paper, certainly, but especially lyrics. And I had an ear for really good lyrics. Mm-hmm. I knew what I liked. And Cole Porter was what I liked. And so I dissected Cole Porter lyrics as my own teaching tool at 14 and figured out what true rhymes were, mm-hmm. the kind of wit and comic sense that he had, and also just the form, the actual form of what a real lyric was. And so I was very self-taught, and so I guess I did know I had something, or I wouldn't have had the chutzpah to do it.
Indeed. Have you subsequently had any formal training, or is it all still self-learning?
No, it's just all been in the doing. And I know now there are more formal training grounds for that, but then there was really no place to go to learn lyric writing except BMI or ASCAP.
Right.
And I did the ASCAP workshop when I already had one of my musicals after the fair, but that was more advanced to actually start. And I think BMI may have been the only course when Lehman Ingalls started where you would go and work on lyrics and music. But I didn't do that. I just kept. Once I got back into writing, because I basically, after that first show, went back to performing, mm-hmm. went to Brooklyn College, did a lot of plays and musicals around the country and some film in New York. And then in my 20s, when I retired from acting, sort of, I found other collaborators, and I just dove back in and just started doing it. And I have to say, it's not just the doing, the writing of it. Anybody can sit down and write something. It's when you have to get it on the stage, mm-hmm. and actually that's when the work really begins. And so I was lucky to have, once I had my first musical produced, which was Godsworth, with Hal Linden, so to have a star and Dee Hoade, a second star, that was the incredible learning experience, to rewrite every day and to tailor material to people's talents. So that's really been my learning ground, has been in the doing.
Did you at that time or sometime later, did you think to yourself, not only do I have talent for this, but I'm actually good at it? Or did you?
Yeah. I thought I was. You have to think you're good. You can't really put yourself down in any way. You have to think you're good at it. And so, yeah, I did. I knew I could be better and better, and that's still to this day. That's the goal. You have to beat yourself up and keep self-criticizing, because believe me, other people will criticize, but your criticism is better. I have a high bullshit meter, so I can't bullshit myself.
Well,
and that's what I do. But I knew I was talented, and a lot of people told me I was, but It was more the proof was in the pudding. Could I get a show on? And I could.
Well, and
that was pretty amazing.
And the fact that you've had multiple shows is a real sign. Obviously, sometimes it takes. What I've noticed in doing these interviews is that sometimes folks who are wildly successful, as you are, it takes them a while in their life before they feel like they know what they're doing. You grasped it much earlier than most, which I think is a very powerful and great thing to have.
And yet, I don't think of myself as wildly successful either.
Well,
I mean, I've had success. I've had a consistency of working in the theater and writing, but I think it's the opposite with me. Yeah, I know I'm good, and I know I can do it. And you have to. I mean, can you imagine just diving in? When you have a cast of 20 and an orchestra and lights and sets, you better think you can handle that.
Or you're done very quickly.
Oh, exactly, very quickly.
Yeah,
and I've seen that happen. I've heard stories about very talented people who freak out when they have to change a song, and that's the time when it shows who you are.
Oh well, it's really all about the rewriting and revision to get it right. Aside from the hard work of writing and studying it, are there other things that you do or have done in your life to help you develop your writing talents?
I think the performing really helped that enormously.
In what way?
The fact that I have to, because I always sang, so first of all, I know what a singable lyric is, and I know that not only does it need to be singable, it has to be actable. There have to be layers and levels. So the performing end of it, which I did for quite a while, prepared me for how do you write for a performer. And if you're writing for the stage, that's what you're doing. When I write a book or a short story, that's it. It's there. Read it. But when you're writing dialogue or lyrics or anything for the stage, you have to know that actors are going to inhabit that. And so I learned that as a performer, and then from even better actors than me. I mean, actors like Hal Linden, who will put you through the mill, which I have funny stories about him. He could be as difficult as could be, but he made me better. Well, as long as I survived, and I did, and people like Chita Rivera, they make you better. But you have to do it for them to do it. So having done it, having been a person who could sing, and even to this day, I will have to sing my own material with the composers to make sure it works. If it doesn't come out of my mouth, it's not going to come out of anybody's mouth.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. It's a little bit akin to working out at the gym. You don't get better by going to less heavy weights. You've got to go to heavier things all the time. You've got to keep challenging yourself.
Totally true.
Otherwise, you go backwards.
So I would say that's what helped an awful lot. And seeing great theater, that can't be denied. I mean, I lived through a great age of musical theater that inspired me, and I need to be inspired. I need to go see something so fabulous, and by that, I lived through the Sondheim era.
Well,
I was able to see every show since Company. So when I came out of seeing a Stephen Sondheim show, I wanted to be better, and I was inspired to be. When I go see something where that is full of false rhymes, I want to kill myself.
So all right. So you're looking for inspiration by going to shows, which is a great way to do it. Where do you get your show ideas? Is there any particular place that you are constantly going back to?
No, not one thing. When I started out, I did only adaptations, which is wise and smart. After that first show, which was totally original.
Well, I'm fairly well known for an adaptation.
Yes.
Yes. that one's had quite a life itself. But yes, so you started out doing adaptations, which I think is really the way to go.
So for example, I also always from the beginning worked with more than one composer at a time. So that started out as a necessity because I would have one of my composers they'd always be musical directors going off doing a show out of town, and I would have no one to work with. So I started working with somebody else on a different show. And once I began that process, it helped that I had all these shows germinating in different times, and which burner would boil. But as far as the adaptations, the first one that got on was Dodsworth, based on Sinclair Lewis novel.
Right.
And I learned the big early lesson of having to deal with the legalities of getting the underlying rights.
Nobody hired you. You came up with that idea and went at it yourself.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. I, like a fool, I watched a movie called Dodsworth. I loved it. And I said to Jeff Saver, who we were looking for something to write together, I said, well, look at this movie and let's see if we can do this. And then we figured out we had to get those rights. So we had to find a lawyer in the Sinclair Lewis estate and write some songs on spec, which we did, and then sing them for a lawyer, who then said, okay, I think you're pretty good, and I'll, give me this much money, and you'll have a year. We had 1 year to write a show. And we did it, and we got it on, which was a rare miracle that I don't think I could achieve in the 21st century, but I could achieve it in the 90s.
It is amazing how the business itself has changed dramatically.
Very. It's economics for the most part.
It really is.
It's economics and fear from theater owners and producers and regionals especially that don't do new works anymore.
Well,
I lived through a time where we literally told the theater, and it was Casa Mañana, a wonderful big theater in Fort Worth, Texas, and the director went and said, listen, if you do this show, it won't cost you any more than doing The Sound of Music. And they said, well, how are we going to sell tickets? And I told them, I said, get a star. And they got Hal Linden, and boom, it was sold out.
Well, yeah, of course.
And that proved that there's a way of working on shows, and I did that for quite a little while with other shows. So as far as Dodsworth so the adaptations happened, and then little by little, in more recent times, I have not out of necessity, but more out of fun. I like doing original shows.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more challenging. It's more freeing. I don't have to worry about that right situation, which I've had to with Time After Time and The Night of the Hunter. I've had to actually. That was the most work, going to lawyers and making deals.
And the least fun.
The least fun, yes. Contracts, ooh, no fun.
All right,
but now I've been able to come up with my own ideas and threads, and they come from everywhere. Obviously, they come from life. The Road to Guitar, which is totally original, is obviously based on our experience of being two short Jews who were hired to do a musical in the Middle East, which also was totally original.
Okay, so let's go from the beginning. You get an idea, whatever this idea. You can even use the Road Guitar if you want. All right, what is the first thing you do? Where do you start? Do you work with plot, character? Do you work on the music? Where do you start?
Yeah, gosh. I just start thinking first. You got to find what do you want to say? What do you want to tell? Characters emerge for me from the situation. It just starts to grow. I'll go for Goin Hollywood. Let's talk about that because it hasn't been produced yet.
All right.
It's really wonderful. I'm sitting around with David Crane for years, and we wrote to Guitar, and he did Inventing Mary Martin with me. And what do we talk about daily? Oh, wow, if only we had lived in an earlier time when we would have been the biggest writers at MGM. And suddenly I said, there's my story about this longing to go back in time that a lot of us have, because we would have been better off then, but would we have? And so that started to propel itself into a story about these two writers, a male and female, who go to this fabulous restaurant at Grand Central Station, which is a complete replica of the Super Chief dining car.
Okay.
And as they go there for her birthday and she blows out the candles, the dining car starts to move cross-country and back in time, and she gets her wish. And once they're back in 1949, her very specific wish, 1949 in Hollywood, they learn the difficulties of that era as well as any other. They find out that it's just as horrible. They go through the blacklist. They go through anti-Semitism. They go through racism. The things that we just take for granted now as maybe having gone somewhere else, although they haven't. They get their dream and they find out that there's holes in every dream.
Right.
And they, as I say, I think I have a good log line for it. It's sometimes you have to go back to go forward.
Oh.
and then they come back with a complete renewal of every time is the same. You better make yours work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it, and it just started growing. And I knew I wanted to write about. I had all this information that I loved about MGM musicals, and I knew it was the end of an era, and so I was really writing about that. And oddly enough, the leading lady character, her name is Alice Chandler, and she came from a song we had already written called Alice's Song, which we wrote for Alice Hammerstein's 90th birthday.
Oh, wow.
That's Oscar Hammerstein's daughter.
Wow.
And the song was so fun and quirky, I kept saying to myself, where's the musical to hold this song? And so now it's in the show.
That's a really cool story that you wrote it for this over here turns into that over there.
And it's a big, fat musical.
And it's a musical in which there are musicals within it, yeah?
Well, they get to write a musical movie. Yeah, they get assigned by L.B. Mayer to write a movie musical about Betsy Ross.
Betsy Ross. And
they are forced to use Ann Miller as a tap dancing Betsy Ross. So they go from there.
All right.
And their director winds up being blacklisted. So a lot of things happen. It's very funny, and it's also turns out to be very true. I mean, L.B. Mayer was the most horrible womanizer, and as we did a reading just a little while ago, people came to see it and said, wow, this is Harvey Weinstein. Oh, okay, it resonates.
Well, that sort of human has not been in Hollywood forever.
No, it's dragging women into the office and saying, I'll make you a star.
I'll make you a star is exactly right. So, all right, so now you've got your show idea and you start to work on it. Do you come up with characters first?
We talk, the composer and I talk about it. I hand him lyrics. I usually, 90% of the time, I write lyrics first. But there are times when I love to have a melody.
Mm-hmm.
And we just start writing. But when I write lyrics, I don't just write the lyric, I write the whole scene around it. So I start from the beginning. The architect is the book writer, and that's me. And I give him the whole treatment, what I think it's going to be, including where there might be some dance, dialogue interspersed, and then someone like David would, as he does, he just takes it and he starts composing. And then I come back and I hear what he's got, and we go back and forth and polish it until it's something we like, and we keep moving in that way. And then you finally have a draft of a show, and what do you do with it? You have to then get some actors and find out what you've got.
Do you tend to do that in New York or elsewhere?
I'll do it anywhere, but some shows, when they're smaller, like when I did with Merman's Apprentice, also original, we did a living room reading first. So we did it in the composer's living room, David Evans, and had maybe 10 friends watching and listening. And that was it. And we learned what we liked and what we didn't like, and we went and rewrote. But the big reading in front of real people, or at least industry people, then in New York you have to, because that's where the actors are.
Sure.
And it costs $1.
And in New York, especially in New York, it's where you have actors who can sing.
Yes.
Because you might have some in L.A., but not really. And you might have some in other cities, but not really.
And what you're hoping for is when you do that, it's for you, but it's also for other people to take a look at to get you to the next step.
Oh, sure.
And so you need the best people. And as you said earlier, you need the best people to float you higher. And find out if the material works, you can't find out on bad actors. They're not, or bad singers, because then you blame them anyway. If something isn't sung the way you want it to be sung, then you can say, well, the song is still good.
Mm-hmm. Right. So,
I even found that out with Hal Linden. When Hal was doing, we wrote Godsworth, we had no idea he would do it, and some of the songs did not suit his voice, or he did not suit the songs, and we had to go and write new songs. Because I said to the composer, guess what? He'll go out there and sing them, and if it sounds bad, they're not going to blame him.
That's true.
And so we wrote things that suited his voice, and that's part of the game.
Going back a half a step, when you have your idea and you're starting to work, are you an outliner or do you just plunge in?
No, I'm a plunger. I'm a plunger, but I will outline at the same time as I plunge. I keep a little bit ahead, but sometimes same thing happened with the novel I just finished. You know, I knew where I was going, but sometimes you just have to write and see what comes out and where it goes.
Was it that way when you were 14 and writing your first one?
Yeah, I think that's how I started.
So that's your thing. That's
I
how
had
you
no
work.
idea of outline. Although I will say, before I wrote that first musical, that's all I did was outlines. I found a bunch of papers from maybe when I was 13 or 12, and they would say a title of a show, and it would say Scene 1 and song lists and things. So the kind of thing you saw that I was copying from playbills. Playbills are really outlines when they tell you Scene 1 and the station, she sings this. And so I would do that, and that's as far as I went. Mm-hmm. But once I started really writing, you kind of know where you're going. And
do you always have an end goal in mind? Do you know where the end of the story is?
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
And sometimes it changes.
Well, of course. So
with After the Fair, which is based on a Thomas Hardy short story, I knew exactly, what I was writing. I was expanding on the short story and loading. It's only 4 characters, but I would say in the short story it's really about 2 women. It's about a woman who writes love letters for her illiterate maid. So it's a female Cyrano in a way, but class structure. And I knew I wanted to expand on the woman's husband, who is hardly visible in the story, and the barrister who they're writing the letters to, the barrister in London, who's a different class than the maid, obviously, the illiterate maid. And so I did. But when I finally finished it, I did give it to a friend who was an agent, and they liked it. And I remember him saying, "Where's the end?" I said, "Oh, it's the same end as Thomas Hardy, where it just ends sad, like all Thomas Hardy does." And he gave me a tiny lesson of the end somehow needs to propel you into what could happen next.
Oh, that's helpful.
Life doesn't just end with the end. And I found I wrote another letter. Somebody got yet another letter that was not in the story, and it gave the whole end of that show a big question mark.
All right, so
and it stayed forever.
I'm going to ask you a question I ask lots of guests, and I get very interesting answers. What for you makes a good story good?
It has to be. I like a plot. I like to go, what's going to happen next?
Yes.
I want that kind of compelling plot where from scene to scene, I want to keep going. I want to keep. When I read, I feel that way, and certainly when I see a show. Some shows are not designed that way. They are more mood pieces. But for me, I like a plot. Like The Night of the Hunter got me immediately. It was like, oh my God, this preacher is after those kids. What's going to happen? So there's always some kind of thriller aspect that helps me, even when it's not a thriller, and a lot of comedy.
So
I believe in comedy.
Have you written shows that are straight dramas? I mean.
Only recently. It's very interesting. I've sat down and tried, and then the characters start to sing. And it drives me a little crazy because it's harder to get a musical on. But recently, since I have expanded into short stories and I've won some contests, I just had another short story published this week. I took one of my short stories and turned it into a one-act play. And I was determined no one would sing. And they didn't. And so that's very recent. And then I took a second one and turned it into a one-act play.
Wow.
And so once again, so I'm on my way to not singing all the time.
Do you think that helps you in terms of writing musicals?
No.
No, not particularly.
No, I think they're equal. It's so easy for me to go in. I believe characters singing, so I believe all this. It's not just well, here comes the song. It's very, very important to me. But no, it's the same but different. That's all. I just think it's easier commercially. It's easier to get a bunch of actors together around a table than to teach a bunch of actor-singers
a whole
score.
Well, of course, musicals are extremely complicated, and so there's no question about that.
So
and usually you have to have somebody that plays the music.
Whether I veer into that direction or not, we shall see. But the comedy was the short one-act comedy came out so well, and I sent it to an actress who has a lot of credits, and she loved it. So who knows?
Well, that's right. So, all right. So now I want to talk about songwriting for a moment.
Yeah.
Which clearly is something that you have a great affinity for. Where do you begin with a song? Songs have all kinds of different ways to go. What do you do?
You begin with the idea of first of all, what you want to say, and who's singing it, and where it's coming, if it's a song in a show. But even if it's not, for me, it is, Ira Gershwin said, the title is vital. Once you've it, prove it. And I stick to that. The title and the hook of the song can propel the whole thing. You have to find something that encapsulates everything you're saying to keep it moving. And I just finished a lyric that may be good, and actually the composer already wrote the music, and I kind of like it. And the idea is that this character who is so needy and needs affirmation all the time, he's going to sing his I Want song. And his I Want is, what would be nice is if I wasn't so needy. And so that was my beginning. I found that. We just chatted a little bit, and I went, what would be nice? And that phrase kept coming because it was a little off-center. What would be nice is if I had money. That would be nice. So that's how I developed that. Sometimes a fabulous title just presents itself. And that's when you're writing to music, which I've done several times, you then look for that fabulous melodic hook that they're handing you.
Sure.
And that's where your title is, and that's where your hook is. It's kind of wonderful when that can happen.
But you have to have that hook. Without that hook, you don't have much.
I think so. Otherwise, you're just spinning wheels.
Well, unless it's
words
rested.
Are like music in that it's got to have a form and a shape, and I think the hook gives you a place that you're going to or a place that you're coming from, and it gives it shape and form.
Unless you're doing recitative, and then you can get away with things.
But that's not. Yeah, but that's opera.
It's
or
not
that's
songs. It's not songs.
It's not what I really do. I can do it for comic effect, but there's even when I'm doing extended song forms, like whole scenes that become songs, they still think the shape rather than the recitative, which would be and then I want to go here and da 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 da. That's not to me what good form musical theater is.
Have you tried to write an opera of any kind?
No, I don't even like opera.
Not interested. What do you think
No.
of? What do you then think of? Let's say Les Miserables.
Not my cup of tea.
No,
I was bored at it.
Really?
That's its own form. That pop opera of the '80s, which really stemmed from Lloyd Webber and those French guys, and those are different kinds of musical theater, and they mostly bore me. That's my opinion.
Do you work with
I do like some Broadway operas from the time when Broadway had operas like Regina or the Console, the Menotti operas or the Medium, because of their stories. And then I think the perfect Broadway operas would be Street Scene. Kurt Weill is my favorite composer. Street Scene, which is a hybrid, really a musical with a lot of music, and the same with Most Happy Fella, which is, Frank Lesser said, it's a musical with a lot of music. It's not an opera. Sweeney Todd, people think of as an opera sometimes, but Stephen Sondheim said it's an opera when it's in an opera house, and it's a musical when it's on Broadway.
I would say it is. That's my favorite musical of all time, and
it's pretty great.
It's pretty good. Great is right, and I think it does sort of bridge the gap a little bit, and there is some dialogue, but it really is mostly sung. So,
but then again, it does not. Its vocal requirements are more Broadway than opera, especially in Mrs. Lovett, because she has to be the most hilarious and deal with those incredible lyrics. I guess that's the difference for me. Because I'm a lyricist, words mean so much to me, and opera shrieks music. And I don't mean they shriek, they sing. But it just it says the music is the most dominant and important feature. And in musical theater, the words are at least equal, or should be.
Right.
And so that's why I enjoy it more. I could be changed if I live another 50 years. Who knows?
When you start to work on a show, do you have a specific audience in your mind, or are you the audience?
It has to be me. It has to be something that I love. Unless it's commissioned, and I've had commissions. And so, for example, Rock Odyssey was commissioned, and it is a rock version of the Odyssey. And so my job was to write the Odyssey so that 12 to 14-year-olds could get it. Mm-hmm. And so then you're writing to an audience, certainly for younger people. But for me, I write for people who love musicals. And sometimes I could, that could be wrong-headed too, because there are people who go to musicals now who don't love musicals.
I think there are a lot of people that go to musicals that don't love musicals. They're usually called husbands.
Right. They're also a new generation who were told this is a musical for people who don't like musicals.
So give me an example of what's a musical that's for people who don't like musicals.
Oh, I'll get in really big trouble. Hamilton.
Hamilton is going to run for a long time.
Of course it is. But it is a musical where the people who think they're too hip for musicals can go to that and say, "Oh, I loved it. I love that stuff. It has all the things I want in it." As opposed to, I will never ever see 42nd Street. You see what I'm saying?
Sure, I do see what you're saying.
Those people are not going to go to Hello Dolly.
But I will say this. I will say that I would rather have, it's just my own opinion, I would rather have people going to a musical who would otherwise not go to a musical go to that musical, and then maybe you get them as an audience for other shows.
Maybe.
I'll take the maybe over not at all.
I'm waiting for the study on that to come back.
Well,
I think you get. I think it's very divided now. Now because prices are so ridiculous high, that people go to one musical, and it might be, and they get to go to Hamilton. Great, I'm happy for them, but I don't think they're going to go around the corner and see Bette Midler and Hello Dolly at that same time.
Well, that may be.
I think they would find that old hat.
That may be, but I think.
But they may see some other show that is going to tickle their fancy,
right,
like
exactly.
Be More Chill this year, something like that. These are different things.
I think that Broadway has to constantly be looking to how do you expand the audience in any way you can.
Correct.
And if you don't do that, it's dead.
And they perhaps are doing that.
Yeah, I think Broadway will absolutely. I mean, it's what's that phrase? It's the most beautiful corpse ever, or whatever the phrase is.
Exactly.
But it continues on, and Broadway's going to go on, I think, for as long as it can. But it could easily go away if there wasn't some renewal effort going on.
Right.
And I think that Hamilton is a big time part of that.
But I have a feeling that musical theater, as we knew it, will go away, and is going away, and has been going away.
Well,
and I think it will wind up a completely different thing.
I think you're
It
right.
might not be one I like.
I think you're right. I mean, if you want to look at it this way, you're very familiar with the history of musicals, and if you go back and look at where musicals came from, when you go back to Showboat in Oklahoma, and you go back into vaudeville and so on, where it came out of, nothing today is really quite like that anymore. It's a different style. It's a different form.
No, it's a new world.
It is a new world, totally.
I say that all the time. It's a new world, Golda.
So, all right. So you've worked with quite a few different collaborators. For what for you makes a good collaboration work?
Well, we do have to be on the same page so that when we argue and talk about things we're just talking about, we have to agree on the kind of theater we want to make. I definitely need composers who favor melody, who understand how to set lyrics, and especially comedy lyrics, and that's hard. Even the best have trouble, and are flexible and collaborative and talking about it, and certainly flexible. I've worked with most of my collaborators. You change things on a dime.
Yes.
And you have to be able to say, as I did with David Crane at our Goin Hollywood reading, I said, that ending is not working. Let's do this, this, and that. And this was an hour before we were about to do it. And he went, yes, let's change it. And we did. I'm sure he would have told me if he didn't feel that way, but he wasn't scared. And none of my collaborators are, for the most part. It's not, you can't go, oh, no, I can't change that. It's done.
Right. Right.
So the lack of fear and the thought that there's 700 more ideas that you can come up with, and that comes under the heading of I know how good I am. So I want them to know how good they are.
So without naming names, has there been anyone you've worked with that you said, wait a minute, this is not working, and you've walked away?
Oh yeah.
So you've
oh yeah.
You've gone down roads.
I won't name names. He's dead, but it doesn't matter. But I started writing a show with a composer, and he was more interested in writing the overture before he wrote a song, which is kind of crazy.
How do you do
and
that?
Then when he did finally write a song with me, he never wrote it down so that the next time I came, I heard a different melody to the same song. And so I knew it was somehow that was never going to work, and I had to get out of that as fast as possible. Because that was me babysitting somebody who might have turned out some good stuff later, but it was going to take about 30 years. So I like fast people, too. So I've had a few. And I've had people I've worked with who I just stopped working with because life became too difficult with them. Not fighting. We just went off on different paths. And I may go back to them, but who knows? But right now, I kind of have 3 or 4 people. I'm usually around the same time.
You like to be working on multiple projects simultaneously.
Yeah, well, it's worked out. I don't think I would have had the 14 produced musicals all over if I had done it only with one. And I have found because it just wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. And then sometimes not everybody's right for the same project.
Well, that's true.
And that's it. I mean, certainly with David Crane, both of our big projects have been personal. Road to Guitar, and then this one, which is an expression of our longing to go back in time and be in a different era. And not everybody feels that way. So same thing with, I handed my short story, Merman's Apprentice, to a couple of people, and the one who reacted and said, this should be a musical, that was the one I wrote with.
Well, that's very helpful if they got the vision that you have.
Yeah.
I hope that part of being a good collaborator is that you have a shared vision of what the product is.
Oh, you have to. You have to. You can't just, unless you're hired. I mean, I know you mentioned that earlier, and that has happened when you're hired to do a job. I mean, Casper was a commission, and I turned it down left and right before I finally said, well, I want to write a whole new show, different from what you wanted me to do. And they all said yes. And it was like, oh, my God, now I have to do it. And I had the greatest time working on that show. And now this new version is a completely new adaptation because we took the big fat Chita Rivera musical and turned it into a show that the Cincinnati Children's Theater, which is going to be 100, is going to be doing. And so, of course, since kids are going to be sitting there rather than kids and parents, that 2-hour show is now 1 hour.
Wow.
And all the fat is gone. And some of the bones that I missed, too, but mostly it's the fat.
What would you say is the single most challenging aspect of creating a new musical or writing a book? What would you say is the thing that challenges you the most consistently?
Worrying about how it's going to get on. That's the biggest challenge. It's really the challenge of writing is delightful, but it's the challenge and the fear that you're not going to get it on a stage or not going to get it published or nobody's going to read it. So it's more about that you always keep in the back of your head because, as you said, you're thinking of an audience, even if it's you, and that's the biggest challenge for me.
Does that continue to spur you on?
Yeah. Yes and no.
Well, I'm saying
no.
if you're working on a project and your concern is how are we going to get this produced,
you have to put that aside at the same time. So you go, but that happens eventually. Eventually, you get to a point where you finish a draft, and then the question becomes, now what? And that's where I say to any writer, and I know this is a question for later, but it's like any writer writing a musical has to be more than a writer. They have to have a producer head. They have to have a publicist head. They have to have a director head. You have to have casting is ultimately very important. Mm-hmm. So you have to know how to do a little bit of everything. And I've had a lot of experience in other areas in my career, including licensing. You need to know a little bit about those contracts. You can't just be a writer anymore. And I think you couldn't be back then either. Rodgers and Hammerstein were not just writers. They were producers. They were publishers. They formed their own licensing company. Everybody figured that out after a while, that if you want to have a life in the theater, you better help create every aspect of it and control it.
Certainly, if you want to make a living at it.
Yeah. Or, and I was, the great line, you can't make a living at it. You can make a killing, but you can't make a living.
I think there's some truth to that.
You're holding on for the killing. You're waiting for Wicked.
Well, good luck. Do you do anything now differently in your approach or working habits with directors and producers that you did not do in the beginning?
Yeah, I beg more. I'm on my knees.
Okay.
Directors, I am more confident about what I'm doing, so I have to actually pull back a little bit and not be too intimidating. That's important. But at the same time, I know a lot, so I deal on a slightly different level. Mm-hmm. I'm not the child as I was when I was in my early 20s writing. And, the director was king, and we fought a little bit and we talked a little bit, but mostly I gave in on certain things that now I wouldn't, perhaps, cutting the song or things like that. So I've changed with directors and producers. They've changed so much.
In what way?
Well, first of all, when you go to a Broadway show, forget it. There's 39 names over a title,
definitely,
and none of those people are really producers. They're backers. They are people who raised money. They all think they're producers, but there's usually one guy who put it all together and who understands things artistically. But I guess once again, I have had so much experience now that I know a little bit about their job too. So I have to either hold back a little bit and not be too intimidating, or help it along. And it's a balancing game. It really is. Mm-hmm. So it has changed because when I was young and naive, I was just so happy to get the show on.
Well,
and
and
I still
you
would be.
and you should have been happy to get the show on.
Yeah.
You know? I mean,
and I listened to other people, and I tried. So I did learn a lot, and now I know more. And is that good or bad? You know, the knowledge.
all right. So what do you do? You know, having a hard deadline is a good thing, I think. But what if you don't? If you don't have a deadline, you're writing something on spec, perhaps.
Yeah.
What do you do to stay on target and deadline? Do you have any particular tricks?
I usually, I'm into it usually, but I go away from it. As I've said, I'll go away from one project and go back to another project, and then I hopefully have the collaborator who gives me a little nudge or a kick, or I give them a little nudge or a kick. But sometimes things, you know, go on their back burners as long as they need to when you're working on something else. And then when you get great stuff on something else, it'll come for that also. I have found, for the most part, if something really, really slips away and you can't write it, there's probably doesn't want to be written. But because I don't have any blocks, thank God.
You don't have that issue. Of course, some writers do.
No,
But
I really don't. And I sit down and I want to write. Actually, lately, I think it's become more of a drug than ever, and that's because I've given myself the permission to write a novel and short stories, and that doesn't take the permission of somebody else in the room. I can just do it, and so I love doing that, and I have to stop myself.
Do you prefer one over the other?
It's become a wonderful drug.
Do you prefer one over the other?
Now I'm really am preferring the fiction, yeah, because I know I can finish something and it's there, and as I said, I get, as time goes by, more and more, it gets harder to get musicals on, not easier.
No question.
And certainly to get them onto your taste. My taste has gotten higher. My bar is raised higher and higher. So sometimes I go, well, I don't know if I want to do it that way. I want to do it the right way. So, I mean, I have to say, you know, I did Time After Time at Point Park, and it was a fabulous experience. I lucked out that year we found the right students to star in this and to be in that show. It was a good year. But I had been there the year before, and we auditioned that class, and we had to not do the show.
Huh.
And that was an interesting thing. You thought, wow, I'm at the mercy of what this class is. And we know, you know, it's like an audience. Like it changes. And they weren't the right people for my show. And that was an interesting experience. So now I had a high bar with Point Park doing that kind of, and people have said to me, well, why don't you do another one of your shows in a university setting? Well, I did the same show in another university, another music school, and it wasn't as good an experience. And I didn't learn as much because, once again, we had to teach the young actors how to do the show rather than them teaching me what was good or bad about the show.
Interesting.
So sometimes the bar has to go in a different place. With that show, I would only do it now with top pros who could then show me what's wrong with it.
Sure.
That's what you're really looking for. You're looking for, okay, what can I make better?
Sure.
It's easy to know you're good, but I want to make it better.
Do you think you're very good at this point at knowing when the note is good and when you know, can you pick things out that you know aren't working and figure out how to work them? Or do you require other feedback, like the audience, like the actors?
Oh, the audience is super important. Without the audience, you know nothing. You can only go so far with the actors in a room and a director who's maybe dramaturgically smart, and then that audience comes. And that's the thing that I fear for young writers who don't get an audience, because individually an audience knows nothing. Together they know everything. And you sit there and you find out everything the first time you put it in, especially, God knows, if it's a comedy. Oh my God.
Well, then you really know.
Either they laugh or they don't.
Or they
laugh.
don't. Well, that's
and I tend to take the George Abbott advice, which is sit right in the middle of the audience with them and feel them. and it's scary as hell at your first performance. And I've done it a few times, all the time. And I enjoy my show that way. First of all, I have a good time if it's going well, and I really do feel when things are when somebody's yawning, or when it feels a little dull. I'm there with them, and I'm an astute audience myself, and I'm not in love with my stuff that much.
What's the biggest disaster you've ever been involved in, and how did you bail yourself out of it?
Oh God, let me think. In a production, you mean?
Or writing or whatever, Have you worked on anything that was just a mess?
That bad time writing with that composer, and I literally had to call and leave a phone message and never answer my phone again.
Oh, wow.
We're never working. Sorry, it's not working. There have been a couple of those, but I haven't had, knock on wood, that I can think of, a terrible disaster. I mean, the whole Middle East experience was so fabulous and almost disastrous that there was nothing you could do. When you have a stage in Qatar with the emir and his wife and 1,000 foreign dignitaries, and things are happening on that stage, since I had nothing to do with the rehearsal period, that you had no idea what they were doing half the time. We wrote a song about this beautiful song about the sea, and it was meant to have a little boy in a sailboat, and someone was singing about the vastness of the sea, and since they couldn't make that work, they had him flying around, because they did have flying apparatus. And I remember turning to Dave and said, "This is terrible. Why is he flying and singing about the sea?" And then I realized they didn't understand English anyway, so it was fine.
Oh, the show was in English?
It was in English, and it was really good.
No wonder why they didn't understand it.
Well, we had foreign dignitaries from every country, and so the script was translated into 5 languages and put on their seats, like an opera.
Wow.
It was an amazing experience. But I wouldn't even say that was a disaster in any way. It was actually a triumph, because I never thought they would get past the opening number.
But they did, apparently.
They did, and it was good.
And from it,
and in my memory now, it's all wonderful.
That is.
We satirized it so thoroughly in The Road to Qatar and turned it into this bizarre disaster that became a hit anyway.
The Road to Qatar?
Yeah.
Has that
that's
been
about us going to the Middle East, and so we did everything that happened during the 9 months of writing that musical is in The Road to Qatar.
Well,
very funny.
It sounds like
very un-PC.
It sounds like a
it
modern.
Every single nationality.
It sounds like a modern Hope and Crosby picture waiting to be made.
Oh yes, it is. That was my pitch. My pitch is, this is the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby picture they never made.
Well, aside from all that, I'm wondering if in all of your experiences you do have particularly or any other story that's either quirky or weird or offbeat or oddball or just plain funny that you can share with us.
Well, gosh, I guess it always comes back to going to the Middle East. But for example, when I was writing for Hal Linden, he not only refused to sing some of the songs because they weren't right for his voice, but I remember him taking out my script first time I met him and saying, "Kid, I'm not going to say all these lines." And I went, "What?" And he said, "Why don't you put yellow through everything you want me to say?" So I gave him back a fully yellowed script. And eventually he did it, and except that he was difficult throughout the whole thing. So right in the middle of the rehearsal process in Fort Worth, Texas, I got sick. All right, I got drunk, and I stayed home one day from rehearsal, and he called me up and he said, "I hear you're sick. Us old war horses never get sick. Now that you're not going to be at rehearsal, I'm going to change some of your lines." He got me right back.
Did he keep him changed?
That's what I went through on my very first show. And then a couple of years later, I'm working with an even bigger star, Chita Rivera, and she's the opposite. She was such a dream, except she refused to say one line in rehearsal, and it was a joke. She was playing the oldest woman in the world, who looked great because she had a lot of facelifts, and she was someone mentioned the singing group, In Sync, and her line was, "I wouldn't know In Sync from In Bathtub." And so I said, "Please, Chita, just say it on opening night." She said it, and they roared at the Pittsburgh CLO. And it got a big laugh. And she came off stage, and she bowed down to me to the knee and said, "Now I'm going to milk it." So I proved her wrong there. That was lovely.
That must have been an amazing moment for you to have Chita Rivera
It was a great moment, and it solidified our relationship so that every night I could go backstage at the CLO and give her new jokes and change things. And she trusted me, and she knew we were both on the same side. And then I wrote her club act, some song for it when she went to Australia. So that's the wonder of this insanity. But Hal was, I'll give you a little postscript for Hal Linden.
Sure.
So I talk about him all the time because he was so funny, and it was a first experience with a star. And one day I walked into Sardi's, and there he was. It was last year. And he's in his 80s now, and I was horrified and terrified, but I went over and told him hello, and I told him who I was, because why should he remember? And he couldn't have been nicer, so it was a really nice round circle.
Well, that is nice,
Yeah.
Sometimes they
said,
do remember.
Yeah, I remember that show. I loved
it. So I've been talking now for just under an hour with the great writer of musicals, Stephen Cole.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. Time flies when you're having fun,
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are just starting to break into the industry, or perhaps have been in a little while looking to get to the next level?
Well, the glib thing I like to say to people who want to write musicals is, don't do it. It's hard. But it comes under the same heading as what they tell actors. If you can't do anything else, if it is so pressing, if it is what you love more than anything, then you have to do it. And you have to know it's not going to be easy. It's finding the right collaborators. It's knowing and knowing your craft and learning from the great craftsmen. That's what I did by learning from Cole Porter, and I teach lyric writing, so I do it from the standpoint of those greats, from Larry Hart to Cole Porter to Oscar Hammerstein to Alan J. Lerner. You don't have to be those people, but learn what made the musical theater great and know everything about your business, because if you were a doctor, you would know everything about medicine. And it does drive me a little mad when people, writers go, well, I don't have to know any of that. I'm writing contemporary musicals. What do I care about Lady in the Dark and Kurt Weill? Well, you do, because you can learn from what they went through, the kind of experimental musical theater. There was more experimental musical theater in Oscar Hammerstein's world than in any other world.
Mm-hmm.
And Kurt Weill, just like still to this day, knocks my socks off that he did 16 musicals on Broadway in the years he was here, from 35 to 50 when he died. Died at 50.
That's
and
amazing.
Everything was experimental, and he worked with a lot of different collaborators over those years. And it was taking the form seriously. So that's what I would say. Go back and study old musicals, new musicals, but especially old ones. Get out of this century, go back to the golden age, and find out what makes them tick. I mean, there wouldn't be this revival of Oklahoma now if the original didn't exist. And to take something that solidly constructed and turn it into something else, whether you like it or not, and it still survives, and the score still survives, and it's still got all of its elements, that means it was a well-made piece of machinery.
Indeed.
And I think you need to know how to make a well-made piece of machinery, and then go off and do your own thing with all that underlying knowledge. That would be my biggest advice.
I think that's incredibly wise advice, and I teach my screenwriting students all the time. You have got to know and be outstanding at the fundamentals before you can go change things up the way that the world works.
Exactly. It's you can't experiment if you don't know what the truth is underneath it.
Well, sometimes you get young artists who have not studied it, and they think they're coming up with it brand new for the first time, when in fact it's been done 20 other times.
Exactly.
So.
And sometimes it shows, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's okay. It's also, here's the other thing, it is okay what's the line? To be new is to be original. To be good is original enough.
I think that's right.
To be good is original enough.
I think that's right.
I truly believe that if you write the best musical that feels like it could have been written in 1960, it probably will be revolutionary today.
Well, Stephen, this has been a real joy for me to have you on the show, and I've heard so much fabulous information and so much good advice that you could pluck almost anything out of here and take it to the next level. So I thank you so much for coming on StoryBeat today.
Thank you so much too. I can't wait to listen to me talk with you.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.